Okay, so it's 2 minutes past 7:30. I can see just a few people coming in at the moment, but we'll make a start so that we don't run out of time. Just want to welcome everybody to the British Orienteering Development Conference for 2022. This is the Access and Permission session, and we have an ecologist and landowner's perspective. Our presenters this evening are Richard Burke and Leanne Sargent from Forestry England. And I just want to take a moment to reflect there that Leanne and Richard will be giving us a perspective from Forestry England. I do know that there are differences around the country in those agreements. So just to let you know that that's the perspective that we're talking about this evening. And I just want to say a huge thank you to them for giving up their time to talk to us this evening. I'm really looking forward to the session, and I hope you are too. Just for anybody that I've not met before, my name's Emma Monkman, and in July of last year, I was welcomed to the British Orienteering team as Access and Environment Officer. And we also have in the background Rick Gamble, and he deserves huge praise because he's put this whole conference together. So huge thanks to him, and he's going to keep us running smoothly this evening as well. So welcome to everyone. I hope everyone's with us now. I'm absolutely sure that you haven't joined to listen to me speaking. So shortly I'll hand over to Richard Burke, who's going to give his presentation first. Then we'll take some questions, and then we'll be handing over to Leanne Sargent. So please do use the chat function for any questions. You can even drop in there if you want to just say hi and let us know where you are joining us from this evening. That'd be lovely as well. So just making sure that everybody's with us before we hand over, and I think so now. So I will hand over now to Richard Burke, who's going to take us through the first section of the presentation. Just a second. There you go, Richard.
Just bear with me. I'm just setting up my presentation. So can everybody hear me okay? I assume so. My name is Richard Burke. I'm with Forestry England in South England Forest District. I'm one of the sort of recreation management team, currently working on a project in the New Forest called the Recreation Management Strategy. But I've previously been a sort of recreation manager here, covering the New Forest in the west of the district, sort of managing really the our visitor offer and also the sort of, I guess, the knife edge that is conservation and access here. So trying to find a balance and a way forward and keep everybody happy. That sort of people, nature and the economy conundrum. So I'm just going to kick off with a presentation around permissions. I'll run through it, and if you can pop any questions in the chat, I'll pick them up at the end. So I'm just going to share my screen.
Great.
And have I got the right screen on? Yeah. Is that the title slide, Emma?
Yeah, it's I've just got something that's popped up on top, which is about to happen. Recreation management and permissions.
Great. So that's me. That's the subject, and I'll just sort of rattle through. I'm afraid there's quite a few slides and a bit of text, so I won't read it all out. So, talking about permissions, from our point of view, really, you know, why do you need a permit to come and carry out an activity or an event on Forestry England land? So more and more our forests are very popular. They're great destinations, great places to come for all sorts of health and well-being reasons. Sort of, you know, get some downtime, see some great locations, and, you know, get yourself across some fantastic habitat, really unwind. More popular all the time. We need to balance that really with the working environment and the fact that we're sort of hosting some of the country's rarest habitats and wildlife in our woods and forests. We've got to need to balance the safety of our visitors, you know, the wildlife that we're sort of looking after, and our land management activities, which help us to generate income to pay for all those other things, but also keep those habitats in good condition and often restoring habitats as well. So we need to look at individual and cumulative impacts of what people want to do and these sort of planned events and activities. And we need to do that alongside other activities that we plan and deliver, plus the needs of our daily visitors that come to the forest on an ad hoc basis, really. And just to put things in context, here in the New Forest part of our district, South Forest District, just within the national park itself, New Forest National Park, we have something like 15.7 million day visits per year. So trying to sort of manage that level of use and the impact, the potential impacts that that has, alongside frequently sort of wider range of more formal sort of events and activities, is a real challenge. So what sort of activities likely to need a permit? So we tend to issue permits when it's really sort of activities with a large group size, really, that may have an impact on some of our infrastructure. Maybe it fills up a car park completely, meaning other people are displaced somewhere else. It could mean an impact on a toilet block or something like that. Sometimes we issue permissions because some of the activities people are coming to undertake are actually prohibited by our bylaws. We have competitive events which need our permission. If you want exclusive use of a part of our site, that means a permission application. If your activity is likely to have an impact on the environment or the work we do or the people that come to visit our forest, then again, requirement for a permit. And also, more increasingly these days, if the activity is all around commercial, sort of has a commercial focus, it's generating income, maybe a large running event, something like that, then we need to have a permit for that. And also, if you're sort of bringing on infrastructure, equipment, or animals actually onto our land, that's again a requirement for a permit. So how do we decide whether we'll allow you to have your event or activity? There's a lot of things we need to take account of. Legal compliance, it's around things like health and safety legislation. Have you got public liability insurance? Have you got a risk assessment? Is there other, if you're bringing animals onto our land, is there other legislation that surrounds that? May need checking. We want to make sure that in our protected landscapes, such as the New Forest and the Thames Basin heaths and some of our Dorset heathlands, the activity meets the environmental regulations that exist. There's all sorts of data protection and safeguarding regulations that we have to take account of now as well, which just keep adding to the sort of administrative burden around this sort of subject area. Does the event meet or compromise our objectives as Forestry England? We really want to work with people who are furthering our ambitions around people, nature, and the economy. So, if Orienteering is a great example, actually, where it's about getting people out into the countryside, keeping people healthy, all sorts of physical and mental health, well-being benefits. So a good example there. Again, it may help us to deliver our objective in some of those areas of our work as well. We'd support that. Some permissions, some activities may interfere with our core business. They may add costs to some of our core business, so we need to take account of that. How does that work? Does it mean we may have to charge more, that sort of thing? And I mentioned earlier, there can be a risk with some of these activities to other users. We wouldn't want someone carrying out an archery event at a busy forest centre on a Saturday afternoon, for example. Also, some activities may have a risk in they may displace our regular visitors to someone more sensitive or to someone that may have an impact on another part of our business. So we need to take account of that. Looking at our assets, we need to protect our assets, our roads, our buildings, and we need to consider species and habitats that don't sort of get protection under the specific legal protection that things you get under the SAP and the triple site, etc. And we need to talk to our neighbours and look at the income generation opportunities as well. So there's a sort of list there of some of the things we're considering. I'm not going to dwell too much on it. I've probably covered some of it already. But it is about the ecology, the wildlife, our operations, other planned events. A huge demand for events across our estate, and they tend to be focused on sort of key centres, such as our forest centres or the New Forest or some of the busier woods. So there's quite a skill, really. Our permissions team have to sort of manage those applications without impacting on other people's permitted events, and that can be a real challenge sometimes. There's only so many car parks, there's only so many toilet blocks on our estate. Sort of managing their way through those and the impact on those is a challenge. I missed the button then. So just talking about the scale of permissions across this, and I'm talking about South England Forest District, and we're a relatively small forest district geographically. We stretch from Dorchester in the west on the south coast to Arundel pretty much in the east, and then up to Newbury, and we manage all the public forest estate within that area. And within that area, our permissions team, which are a team of well, it was a team of 2 people actually until a couple of years ago, and we've doubled the size of that now to 4 people because of additional levels of administration, additional demand, some of the things I'll talk about a bit later on in the presentation, to 4 people. So I think we're just in the New Forest alone getting over 3,000 applications a year for permissions for events and activities. You know, I've sort of greyed out the more recent figures because the last 2 COVID years have had a huge impact on our permissions sort of business, if you like. But in 2019, across the district, there were sort of 2,600 events facilitating sort of recreational visits for 81,000 people, which is quite a significant amount of formal activity on top of the already significant informal activity that occurs across our estate. Things have been a bit strange, obviously, the last couple of years, but even during the worst of the pandemic years, we were still facilitating events and activities for up to 41,000 people across our estate, which is a real, really positive thing. Our permissions team, we managed to stay open throughout, and where possible, adapting and changing to the regulations as they were changing, managed to keep people using our woods and forests. So why are we here really? Why did we end up, Leanne and I, talking about permissions and access in the Forestry England estate? I guess there've been some changes recently. 3 key things really have impacted on how we as a district manage our permitted activities and events. There's been a national review throughout Forestry England of permissions. There's also been a piece of work done locally that I'm sort of heavily involved in called the New Forest Recreation Management Strategy, and I'll talk a little bit more about all of these shortly. There's also been some changes in the interpretation of the environmental laws and regulations around the habitats regs, which I could dwell on a little bit more shortly. I'm not an ecologist, and Leanne may be able to clear up some of the technical aspects around that legislation, but it's been a key driver really for some of the changes we've had to make legally in how we manage this type of activity on our estate. So just sort of talking about the national review, our organisation has changed considerably over the last few years. We've gone from Forestry Commission to Forestry England now. We're sort of an organisation really with some great aspirations around delivering sort of multiple benefits really to people, to nature and to the economy. And as such, our recreation offer has changed and really smartened up. We're investing in our visitor centres, our visitor experience, our visitor offer wherever possible, to make, really trying to engage with people and get them out and using our forests and woods and telling our story around what we do, how we go about our business, and telling them all the sort of good things that we're delivering. The demand has increased for a sort of wider range of activities and events in recent years. There's a lot of more commercially focused operators out there looking to carry out sort of quite large running, cycling, triathlon type events. There's a lot of people, looking to carry out sort of fitness activities in the outdoors, which is all good stuff. But, again, large numbers of people, big events, our resources haven't changed, the car parks numbers haven't changed, toilet haven't changed. So to sort of focusing on making sure that works really. And consistency, there was a lot of inconsistency, I think, between forest districts in England as to some of the charges, the way we sort of approved permissions or not. So we've tried to sort of streamline that, make it fair across districts, make it fair for different user groups, and make it sort of clear really. We've set a new charging structure over the last year or so. This doesn't really impact on your work as orienteers too much, because we've got a national agreement that covers this stuff off, which is dealt with slightly outside this process. But we're looking to just, make sure our land is valued really, and that we're sort of keeping up with our competitors and other landowners and recreation providers. So we're not sort of free, easy, and cheap, and we're able to sustain our business going forward really, and keep delivering the multiple benefits that we bring. So increase the administration fee slightly. We've sort of put a 20% of turnover charge on commercial activity, which is sort of standard these days. And as your group or your activity or event becomes more sort of charity or community focused, we sort of charge less and less, to the point where if you're a local volunteering group and you're meeting our objectives and not compromising our sort of aspirations, then it's free basically, which is sort of how it should be really. So that's the national stuff. The local stuff really, and this is sort of specific to the New Forest, I guess, because the New Forest is a special area conservation. It's a SSSI, Ramsar site, special protection area, and Leanne will sort of talk a little bit more about this type of stuff in her presentation. But we set out with 6 statutory authorities in the New Forest a few years ago, just to look at how we were managing recreation really. I mean, again, I mentioned earlier, we've got 15.7 million visitors here in the New Forest per year across the national park. Our recreation infrastructure hadn't changed much since the late 1970s, early 1980s, and the noise around the place was that we were looking at changes in housing developments around the edge of the New Forest, significant numbers of houses, people with more leisure time, more demand for outdoor leisure activities. And actually, we felt there was a need to get ahead of the game on this really, so that we want to try and continue to allow people to come here and get the benefits of being in the landscape. But we need to understand and to mitigate the impact of them being in the landscape. So the recreation management strategy set out to do that, try to look forward and try and get the things in place to make changes for the better, to reduce the impact of visitors on the place, but also increase and enhance the visitor experience as well. So a review in 2017, 2 really extensive public consultations, lots of stakeholder interest, and some key themes emerging really. Raising, the key themes were really about raising awareness and understanding. So telling people who are coming here about the place, getting them to understand the special qualities of the place, being more sort of proactive in managing recreation. So trying to keep people away, trying to influence people's behaviour, I suppose, subtly, so that they're doing the right thing all the time rather than inadvertently doing the wrong thing. And then the third one was really about finding the resources to pay for the 2 above. And you'll see how some of these things sort of mesh into some of that national work, which was sort of independent of this really. So another consultation in 2018, we ended up with 7 strategic objectives. We whittled all that down to 22 plain English actions, and further narrative on what those actions mean and what we'll do. And we got those all signed off with the statutory bodies in the New Forest back in early 2020. What does that mean for permissions and events? Well, The strategic action 2.4 was about managing organised activities and larger events with the aim of minimising the negative impacts on wildlife, also on the work in forest, the common inactivity, the activities we carry out to produce the income that pays for all the other stuff, and on local people. And that was all about just reviewing and updating the permissions and licensing systems, how we were administering those, how we were judging what is and isn't allowed. And some of that stuff comes out of the recreation management strategy memorandum of understanding about what we will permit where and what we will support, what we won't support where. Any charges, how we publicise the need for event organisers to register events, how we provide information around reducing the risk of unintended consequences. And we sort of started doing some work on that back 2019 really, and how we manage permissions, trying to sort of deliver that action through our permissions team. Some of the things that we looked at the time as a sort of working group, in myself, Leanne, our permissions team, our head of wildlife management, we'd looked at reaching out to a lot of the stakeholders and a lot of the groups that were using our land to carry out events, some with permission, some without permission, some really long-standing permissions, and we tried to sort of work with them to get them to understand the journey that we were on and the obligations that we were under to try and reduce the impact of the place. And you can see from those slides, I'm not going to go into the details here, but we worked with a lot of different event organisers, activity organisers, even the military who are using our land to carry out military training, just to try and tweak their sort of activities and event plans to try and reduce the impact on the special area of conservation. And we had some really good success there. There were some really challenging conversations and difficult situations that once we'd sort of understood each other's aspirations and motivations, then I think we got some really good progress on that. And that includes working with a local orienteering sort of team to try and deal with some issues around things like the November Classic that were sort of quite challenging at the time. But you know, we ended up with a compromise in the end that moved us in the right direction. So more there, all sorts of people we've sort of engaged with and tried to understand what they were doing. It's sort of running clubs were just using tracks which crossed sort of sensitive bird nesting habitat in the bird nesting season. They just didn't understand that was having an impact. And so, you know, we managed to help them to choose alternative routes that were more robust or weren't sort of necessarily having that same level of impact. And, you know, they were happy for the most part. So the third sort of thing really was the changes around the conservation of habitats and species regulations. And we sort of 2000, I can't remember, wow, a few years ago around this time, we had to sort of take account of these new regulations when we were looking at our permissions. But at the time, it was decreed that we'd have to sort of go through this process for every permit application. We managed to find a sort of generic solution to this, where we had a generic HRA for different types of activity, and that was working fine. We've just come to a point now in 2020 where we had to put that in place for the next 5-year period, and as such, some of the sort of changes that you might see or you might be facing, or we might have had to sort of push forward, are a result of things changing really, and how that legislation is interpreted in a legal sense. And it's due to, you know, I'm not an expert in this, and Leanne may be able to elaborate more, but there's some case law around this sort of subject area, not specifically related to recreation, but related to other things that have set the bar a little bit higher in how we, you know, in the burden of proof really, to prove that some of the activities and impacts that we're allowing to happen don't have a long-lasting significant impact on the special area conservation. That also with it brings increased level of monitoring, so we're making sure that that impact isn't having a long-lasting effect. And we've had to sort of look at what we call the in combination effect as well. So the impact of the permitted activity alongside the informal activity that is just normal people come into the forest for their sort of ad hoc recreational activity. I'm going to whiz through the rest because I'm sort of getting short of time, really, I think, and I've been impinging on Leanne's presentation. But you know, we're the competent authority. We decide with Natural England how we move forward on that. We've got legal duty. We have to apply the sort of Sanford principle and the precautionary principles. So you have to be precautionary unless we've got absolute evidence, and it's really often quite challenging to get that absolute sort of evidence, really. And there are sort of that generic HRA framework covers sort of low risk events, really. So things like the November Classic, where there's a high number of competitors, have to have their own standalone HRA and be assessed independently, but in combination again with all the other stuff. So you know, all that work around sort of the HRA is an attempt to manage, to avoid or mitigate any impact. We need to have a really robust and transparent protocol as to how we assess that. We've worked with some consultants who are sort of experts in this field to get that stuff in place, and we're there with it now. It's like I said, that in combination effect is a real challenge here in the New Forest, just because of the high levels of use outside of the planned activities. And you know, that sort of high level of non-permitted use and displacement of other sort of activities by events is a real challenge. So we've got, and I'm not sure if Leanne's going to talk a bit more about this, but you know, we're putting more monitoring in place. It's got to be effective, reliable, timely, monitoring compliance with the protocol, making sure we're taking account of those activities. Some of the mitigation I talked about could be as simple as timing. So, you know, if you come into the New Forest to have your event in the middle of the bird nesting season in May, but you could have it in September, well, that's great. That means it's much more likely that we could allow that event to go ahead. Could be the time of day. It could be a limit on numbers. It could be the use of a robust track network, like I just talked about before. There may be other arrangements we can enter into to try and make that event comply. There's some examples here of some of the mitigation. I'm not going to run through those, but I guess we'll post this presentation up somewhere for people to have a look at a later date.
Yeah.
And again, their size of event. So that's our sort of agreed protocol, really, for how size impacts how we manage these applications. And then we talked about locations. So this is what we call the robust track network. So if people are broadly sticking to these tracks, they're unlikely to be having a significant impact on the SAC. If you sort of deviate off this track network at certain times of the year, then you are likely to have a significant impact, and we'll have to sort of look at your event slightly differently. So they're the sort of broad principles, really. You know, I was just going to go and say we are 86% or something like that self-funding Forestry England now. The money we take from government really is only 10 to 15% of our actual turnover. You know, that trading activity that we carry out, selling timber, selling car parking spaces at forest centres, delivering events and activities, renting out land for aerial masts, farms, grazing, all that type of stuff, means that we could deliver all the sort of wide range and public benefits that we do deliver. And so the permissions work is another part of that, really. We have to make sure that it at least washes its face. We're not sort of sinking money into it unless it's delivering other parts of our objectives. And it can, you know, if managed successfully, contribute to that 86%, if you like. We're not sort of reliant on the taxpayer, and we can do more in delivering for people, nature, and the economy.
Thank you. Is that you, Richard? Are you finished?
Done, thank you. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much. I know it's a bit strange because you only get to see your screen, so you don't actually know
Anybody else? I know it's very strange.
or anything. So we are here and we were listening intently, and questions have been coming in. So I'll just excuse me over onto my other screen just to make. Yeah. Okay. So just there's some questions coming in. So we'll just take a few questions at the moment. And just to confirm that the recording and the slides will be posted soon after this evening's presentation on the training and support page of the British Orienteering website. So if people want to go there, they'll be able to find out. Okay, so I'll give a couple of questions now and then we'll see how we go on this. So somebody's put that the lower limit of 25 is good to read. I've been put off organising very small introductory or training events. Does this mean I could put on activities for a couple of families or 5 to 8 people being coached or trained?
Well, so it depends. What you've got to remember is nationally, nationally you've got an agreement with us as Forestry England, as British Orienteering, and you'll really need to go back to that national agreement. So our sort of relationship with you is managed through that, I believe. There's no reason that should be any different than the wider sort of rules around events on our estate, if you like. But it's always best to just check with your local permissions team on that, because they'll be able to advise more specifically. But it should, the idea is that low risk activities and events where we're getting people out to engage in sort of healthy air exercises, we don't want to be standing in the way of that sort of stuff, really.
Okay. And we have a comment coming in from Robert Campbell that this is fascinating and chimes with experiences further north, the Lake District. In broad terms, does it suggest that orienteering will struggle more than it has done previously to secure access in the future, or is that too general for each Forestry England area?
Well, it depends really. Now, and I can't comment for the rest of our estate. I mean, I know the rest of our estate, but not every piece of land. But some of the things I've been talking about here around the new forest and the habitats regulations stuff and the recreation management strategy stuff, that's just really, we've got an acute issue here in the new forest, in that we're smack bang in the middle of central England. We're an hour and a half from London. We've got Southampton and Bournemouth on our doorstep. We have 15.7 million day visits per year to the national park here. And I think it's got the sort of highest number of visitors for any protected landscape in the UK. So some of the work I'm doing on the recreation management strategy, trying to tune in how people access the new forest, and the work around the habitats regulations assessment is because of the special area conservation status that the new forest has. Now, the sort of chief executive of the National Park Authority here, she says that we're a sort of barometer really for the future for some of the other national parks, and it's insanely busy down here, and we've got a very highly designated landscape. There will be challenges in some other areas on our estate, and I think places like Thetford Forest, where you've got a large SPA for birds, there may be some challenges there coming through, and it may be the case where there are other special areas of conservation or SPAs where this legislation will apply. But there are huge areas of our estate where there aren't so many issues. So, locally here in South Forest District, when we've been working with orienteering groups and other groups as well, the first question really is, do you need to have that organised event or activity in the new forest on the SAC? 5 miles down the road is Moors Valley Country Park, where we've got a huge visitor centre, car parking for 1,000 cars, and a huge forest that can swallow people up without really having much of an impact on any significant nature conservation interests anyway. So, that it's about sort of really having the right activity in the right place, and there's always a place. It just might, in some locations, be a bit more challenging.
Okay, perfect, thank you. So we have lots of questions coming in the chat, which is great. But I am keen that we get to hear from Leanne. So I wonder if we would be able to pose any questions that we don't get time for to yourselves, and then perhaps we can put the questions and answers with the recording of this evening webinar, if that's okay. But please do keep questions coming in for anybody else. Richard, could you hand over to Leanne then, so she can share her screen with us, and welcome. Thank you. And thank you, Richard. That was great. Really good. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay.
Right. Evening, everybody. Yes, my name's Leanne. I'm the Senior Ecologist for Forestry England in the South District. As Richard said, you know, we look after about 46,000 hectares in the South District, across Hampshire, Isle of Wight, Dorset, West Sussex, Surrey, and into Wiltshire. So it's quite a big area that I look after, and I've got 2 other ecologists that work with me. And the majority of this land is designated for its conservation value, so it's a SSSI, an SAC, or an SPA, as Richard's mentioned those terms. So we've got quite a large area that we look after with lots of designation. Just need to get rid of this second. Okay. So the New Forest is a really special area, and it's just one of the areas that I look after. And it's particularly special because of its natural beauty, but also the scale of the habitat that's all linked together. It's had really low impact from humans over centuries, and so, you know, that's allowed this really unique set of wildlife to become established here, and it supports a huge range. Don't know why it keeps switching me off my slides, which is frustrating. I don't know why that's doing that.
Yeah, we can see your slides, Leanne.
Yeah, I can't. I don't know why. Okay. For some reason it keeps flicking back to the webcams. Yeah, the New Forest is got a wide variety of plants and animals that are there, rich moss and lichen flora, for which it's designated, and that's the richest in all of Europe. There's some really scarce flowering plants, such as small fleabane. I'm going to talk to you about some of these a bit later on in my talk. It's got birds that are of European importance that nest here, and I'll go into a bit more detail. And it's one of the largest areas for breeding waders in southern England. As you can see from the map here, and Richard touched on this, we're surrounded by major conurbations, but the New Forest has this sort of oasis of wilderness in the middle of it. And as I say, it's about that extent of habitats that make this really unique and really important. From the Forestry England point of view, we've got about 29,000 hectares of this that are owned by us, and you can see that's the sort of pale blue colour there on the map, and the sort of remainder are owned by National Trust, and Hampshire County Council owns some of the commons, and then there's a few sort of private commons that are owned there as well. I don't know why it keeps, that's better. So the New Forest covers quite a wide range of different habitats. It's got heathland, it's got open habitat, it's got a sort of wide range of ancient woodland, and all of this contributes to this sort of designated landscape in this national park. It was really developed because it's this historic forest that was part of a hunting forest. The old term of forest sort of incorporates all this open landscape that you can see in this slide. So I'm going to talk a bit about why it's so special and try and sort of get that point across to you really about what makes the New Forest so special. So it's really that it's got such a unique suite of different habitats that are all together and all interconnected. And the fact that it's been relatively undisturbed for so many centuries, you know, there has been human impact on it, but it's been relatively undisturbed compared to a lot of our countryside. So you've got this sort of range of different habitats that I talked about, but they're very fragile and they're very easily damaged by human intervention. And some of the heathlands after the or during the First and Second World War were sort of scrubbed up and laid down for potatoes, and they limed them, and over time you can start to see this liming receding out and the heather re-establishing on these areas that were quite significantly changed. But it shows how readily it recolonizes once you stop the disturbance. So we've got quite a wide range of different types of habitat, and I'm going to show you some images of what these all mean and how they work. But as you can see from this slide, the main sort of point to get across here is that the majority of our heathland is wet heathland, valley mire, and those associated communities. So we have relatively little dry heath, which dry heath is much more readily able to cope with some level of human disturbance, but these wet habitats, which the majority of the New Forest heathlands are much more susceptible. The wetlands of the New Forest equate to 75% of the wetland habitats in Western Europe, so really highly valued and of high importance. New Forest has lots of special qualities, and one of them is the natural beauty, just, you know, the sheer enjoyment you get from seeing these different types of habitats. And I think, you know, that's what draws people here, and that's why people want to come and recreate and do their different activities that they're interested in here. We also get a lot of requests to come and study wildlife here, but of course we've got to balance those things with what potential impact they might have. So, you know, as well as its natural beauty, the New Forest has lots of roaming livestock that draw people to the forest, and people are always really interested in interacting with them and seeing them in their natural environment and behaving in a relatively natural way, because they're more or less wild or semi-wild. And so, you know, it's a great place for people to come and learn and see how you know, pony herds would work without man interfering with them to some extent. There's a really wide range of wildlife that use the New Forest for their home. In the New Forest, we have 12% of the British population of woodlark, and over 33% of the British populations of Dartford warbler. So really key area for ground nesting birds and for wildlife generally. Nightjar is another one of our ground nesting birds, and you can see from the top picture they're really well camouflaged. I promise there's a nightjar in that picture. They roost on the ground and make their nests on the ground, which is why they're so susceptible to disturbance from people. One of the reasons why the New Forest is designated is for its nightjar, among other ground nesting birds, and they're using these heathland areas for making their nests and for feeding. And as you would expect by their name, they fly around at night and sit as quiet and still as they can during the daytime. So in the New Forest, we've got all 6 native UK reptile species, including sand lizard and adder and common lizard that are pictured here. We've also got some of the rare butterflies that are the sort of most rare in the UK. Small pearl-bordered fritillary, which is pictured this orange butterfly at the top, is in the New Forest, as our whole suite of other butterflies which we survey throughout the summer period. We're also really lucky to have the southern damselfly, which is this blue damselfly in the bottom picture, which is only found in wetland areas right down in the south of the country here. Some of the really interesting and rare species that we've got bog asphodel here, field gentian, one of the hericium fungi that lives in the A&O woodlands. We've got chamomile, which occurs on lots of the lawns. It's never as big as this picture of this flower in the New Forest, because all our flowers in the New Forest get nibbled by ponies and deer and other livestock, and so they grow in miniature here. So it's often tricky to identify them, because you've got to identify them when they're a few millimeters big, as opposed to this picture, which was not taken in the New Forest, of the chamomile. And also, you know, in a lot of our wetland sites, we have really rare invertebrates, and the large masked grasshopper, which is this purpley coloured grasshopper in the bottom right picture, is another real rarity. They're only found here and in a couple of wetlands in Dorset, and our populations thankfully are doing extremely well, and you get this purple form occur in the New Forest because the populations are doing well. That only occurs in healthy populations. And we've actually been part of a programme to re-establish large masked grasshopper in other locations where they would have been historically. So you can't have a picture, you can't have a presentation without some pony poo in it. And this is, you know, it shows how important it is, this whole sort of ecosystem in the New Forest. All of these things don't occur without something else to create them. So, you know, a lot of the wildflower species I just talked about in the last slide, you know, need a level of grazing to be able to become established. And this fungus that you can see growing here on this dung shows how important the ecosystem is and the structure is. And it only occurs, and the dung beetles also that feed on pony dung only occur on free roaming livestock that are not treated with wormers and pesticides, because, you know, if this was a dung from a stabled horse that's, you know, a pet in or riding horse, you know, because the pony's treated for worms and the like, you wouldn't get these growing on there because that affects it. So, you know, it's a implication of having these free roaming livestock. Another species, a small fleabane, is a pretty innocuous small flower, but a real rarity and critically endangered. These are like sort of the equivalent of, you know, your panda, but in the New Forest. And this species grows where there's some amount of trampling, so it needs that grazing to create a small amount of pocks in the soil and poach marks in the soil, so that it can grow, because it can't compete with the grasses that grow in the ground flora. So it needs that sort of bare ground to get established. But obviously it's that balance, it's a very delicate balance, too much poaching and you lose it, too little, and it can't compete. So small fleabane is one to look out for, and it really has become a stronghold in the New Forest because of the way the forest is managed and these livestock that graze here and the sort of variation in the livestock turnout. So one year a commoner might put some animals out from their holding, and you might get a bit of winter poaching out the back of their property, but then next year they don't, and so the small fleabane can then get established in that new bare ground but isn't heavily trampled. So it's that ad hoc nature of the commoning that supports these species, because they need that transitional habitat that commoning and the livestock provide. So just having a look through some of the different habitats. So this is our least abundant habitat of heathland, dry heath. In the picture here, you can see a lot of ling, which is one of the heather species. As we move through wetter, humid heath that's slightly wetter than the dry heath, we get a lot more bell coming into it, and as you get more wet, you get into areas with cross-leaved heath. And over the sort of transition of these habitats, they're not a clean line. It's not that dry heath starts and then it becomes wet heath. It's like this transition of habitats from the sort of upper slopes down into slightly wetter humid heath, and then into wet heath, which has more rushes and sedges in it, and lots of Molinia tussocks, which is this purpley grass that's sticking up tall in the foreground here. You know, we've got other important heathland communities that support species as well. So, you know, this gorse and scrub on the edge of the heathland is really important for Dartford warblers. They like to nest in the protection of those gorse bushes. Nightjar will use the scrub to sit up on to look for prey and to hunt for prey at night, but then they need to get down into those wetter heath areas to nest and hide out. We've also got quite a suite of acid grassland across the New Forest, you know, for a lot of people, this just looks like a bit of grassland and not of any particular interest, but this supports a whole suite of invertebrates and rare plants as well. And again, it offers that sort of transition from the sort of short sward into the heather that's really important for a lot of species. So we've got, you know, some really rare spiders that would live in this sort of foreground of this short acid grassland habitat here. Bracken, weirdly, is really important as well. So everyone thinks, oh, we just cut bracken and get rid of it off the forest all the time. And we do manage the bracken quite heavily to keep it at the right level. But we need some bracken. Bracken supports other species. So the gladioli, which is another New Forest rarity, needs the bracken to protect it from browsing from stock and from deer. But if there's too much thatch of bracken on top of the plant, it can't poke up and grow through. So it needs some bracken growing and some bracken cover, but not too much of a thatch of litter of bracken. So managing the bracken in rotation so that we have some bracken is really important. So in areas where it's sort of thin cover of bracken, you could well find the New Forest gladioli along with moonwort and the high brown fritillary, which will require that for part of their lives. Going into a bit on the ancient and ornamental woodlands, these are the sort of areas of the New Forest with these big, lovely veteran oak trees and beech trees, and they're often grazed, although we do have some areas that are fenced within enclosures that are sort of slowly being turned into these ancient woodlands of the future. These areas contain a lot of veteran trees that are really important for wildlife. They support a lot of bat species because they have lots of holes and cracks in them. We've got some of the rare bat species live in the New Forest, such as Becksteins and Barbastelle have roosts in the New Forest. They offer a wide range of habitat for all sorts of different wildlife because they've got all these little cracks and crevices in them that species can get in. So we've got species like this lichen, which grows on the bark of these veteran trees and is a woodland indicator, shows that it's ancient woodland. Identifying these lichens is a real specialist requirement. So we have a number of surveyors who work with us to survey species, and they give us information about how to manage the veteran trees to protect and promote these lichen species that live on the ancient oak trees in the New Forest. One of the things that the New Forest is highly designated for is dead wood, and to us that can look like just some bit of old branch that's fallen down or a bit of old trunk that's slowly rotting, but this is home to hundreds and thousands of insects and fungi, and this is the reason for the New Forest heavy designation. This deadwood lying down here or standing up, wherever it is so important. It offers habitat for a whole wealth of different species. And we've got policies to protect the deadwood in the New Forest and ensure that we have a continuation of a supply of it, and we have to have so much of it in a sort of area to ensure that we keep the resource there for all these different species that rely on it. So we've got species like the stag beetle in the top left here. These are quite rare. There's sort of strongholds down in the south coast here, and then there's strongholds over in East Anglia for this species. Its larvae live in deadwood, and the larvae stay as larvae for up to 7 years. So they have to continually be eating bits of dead wood for 7 years. So they need a big area and a lot of decaying timber of the right sort of age and decay for them to live off before they then hatch out, fly around and mate, and then die. It's pretty dull, but it's good if you're a larvae. But once you reach adulthood, it goes pretty quick. And then the other species I've got a picture of here is the noble chafer, which is another really rare invertebrate in the New Forest that relies on the ancient woodlands. It creates nests within the hollows in the ancient trees and feeds off flowering plants nearby. So a really rare invertebrate across the whole country. And these are just tiny number of species that are living off these decaying areas. I'll just whiz over this bit quickly. We've been doing a lot of work in the New Forest to restore habitats back to how they should be, and the wetland restoration is one of them, which makes it challenging for when you're orienteering because we go and get rid of a nice straight drain that was perhaps on a map and then put these squiggly meanders back in, and then your mapping doesn't work anymore because we've changed the river and moved it to its original place. This is really important because this is about protecting the habitats that are here by reconnecting the river with the floodplain, because you can see in the left picture you've got this deep straight channel, the water's just rushing away, and on the right hand picture where it was restored, the water is able to rise up and come out of the bank in times of heavy rainfall. And that ensures that nutrients are shared onto the floodplain, but also it slows the flow of water, because if you think the water rushing straight down this straight channel takes it straight down to the nearest village where it will flood, whereas on the restored channel it meanders round, the water's able to get out of banks, so then it doesn't rush down the stream as quickly. It slows the flow of water down through the forest and floods the areas in the forest where it doesn't matter, as opposed to flooding your villages and towns downstream. We're also doing a lot of work on the mires to restore these and protect these, and this is a picture of work in situ. So we've got some heather bales that we use to block up where you've got erosion in a mire, and we stake those with stakes that get banged in, and eventually the peat restores itself over the top of this, and you stop having a channel of water coming through the mire, but you have instead, like this beautiful valley mire that doesn't have any water flowing in it. It has water in it, but it's like a big sponge, and it holds that water all summer and slowly is releasing it out of that habitat. So there's lots of reasons why this is really important. I mean, it's storing water, so it's good from an ecological point of view. You've continually got some flow, small flow coming out at the end of it when perhaps elsewhere has dried up. The valley mires are really important for the grazing livestock in the summer, where everything else has dried off and been eaten off. These will still be green and growing because there's water held in this big sponge in these mires. The other really important thing is that this is storing carbon. all through its life, this keeps creating more and more carbon trapped in the peat that is developing underneath this vegetation layer. And this stores more carbon than any woodland could ever manage in its lifetime. So mires are really important. I've just got a couple more slides. I realise we've gone over a little bit. So I've got some of the rare plants that you can see in the New Forest. We've got pillwort, which is this little green grassy thing, Hampshire purslane with this purple leaf here, and then coral necklace, which you can see sort of hangs in these sort of necklace shapes. All three of these species are really rare. Hampshire purslane only found in the New Forest, pillwort and coral necklace strongholds of the New Forest, and really susceptible to damage, and these all grow on the peripheries of these wet habitats. So this sort of interface between open water, which you might find in a pond, and then the sort of wet and humid heath that makes up so much of the New Forest, these species all sort of grow in that interim habitat. And so, you know, it's really important that we ensure that these are protected. They're all way too susceptible to damage. We've got a number of ponds in the New Forest, over 1,000 in total across the New Forest. Hatchet Pond is the biggest, which you may well have seen. Lovely place for sunsets. Hatchet Pond has over 133 wetland plant species that live in it, and 11 of these are classified as important for nature conservation, which means that they're extremely rare, and Hatchet Pond is one of the few places in the whole country that they live on. But we also have ponds like this that dry up in the summer, and so, you know, you can see this white marker post marks where the pond was. This is winter on the left and summer on the right, with the dry muddy patch. And this is really important because some species in the New Forest have evolved to only survive in ephemeral ponds, which is what this is. This is ephemeral ponds that support species like fairy shrimp and tadpole shrimp. Admittedly, not very exciting looking at, and they're quite small species, but really, really extremely rare. And you can see from this slide, only 2 sites in the whole country have tadpole shrimp on them. So an extremely rare species that we really do need to protect. And it just lives in that wet pond that we saw in the previous slide. It hatches when the water, when it rains and the pond fills up with water, and then when it dries out, it goes down into the soil, and the eggs are laid in the soil to protect it till it rains again. So a really fascinating species. But okay, I'm finished. I whizzed through that last bit, but thank you for listening.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. That was absolutely fascinating. I loved every minute of that. And just for the attendees, you've sent presentations to us both, so that we can put those up on our website as well. I know that there are questions still coming in, but I am conscious of the time now, and we were due to finish at 8:30. So I've agreed with Rick that we will do a question and answer sheet that we will put up with the presentations on the website. So please know that every single question that you've posed to us will go on there, and we will ask Leanne and Richard when they get time in their incredibly busy schedules to answer those for us, and we can add those up as well. So just a huge thank you. I know how busy you both are, and I thought that was fascinating, and thank you for sparing the time. And I know it's important. I know it's an important subject to the sport of orienteering moving forward. But we very much want to work with you, and I thank you for being here this evening. So thanks everybody, and yeah, you'll be able to get the video and the presentations will be on the website, and that will happen at some point during probably after the development conference. So thanks everybody, thanks for tuning in. That was great. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.